Hello.
Hello there.
Hello. It's we're back at Books at Lunchtime and we've got Matson Taylor here. Hello.
Hello. Very nice to see you both again. Hi.
It's
Nice
lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's a lovely lunchtime treat.
Excellent. It's not your first time talking to us, is it?
That's right. It's the second time I've been talking to you online, and then I've also visited the shop, the lovely shop as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Extra brownie points for you.
Yes.
In fact, I used to work in Wymondham and know how to say it properly. So I know it's Winman. So I used to work there.
And you can even spell it then.
It only took me about 3 weeks before people corrected me and stopped me saying Wymondham.
So when was that then?
That will have been sometime around 2003, I think, and I was there teaching adults how to use computers, which is incredible because I'm absolutely hopeless. But we all had enormous fun. Yeah,
So
it was good fun.
Did you set out to be an adult education teacher?
No, this came off the back. I used to teach English at university when I was living in Italy and in Barcelona in Spain. And I originally came back, I lived in Norwich for a little bit, and I was going to teach Italian to English students at the university there. And they didn't have enough students signed up, so they just said, I'm really sorry, there's no job. And by this point I'd come back to England. I'd bought somewhere in Norwich, so then I started looking for various jobs, and I taught English with the council to refugees in Norwich and in Great Yarmouth, and then I was offered this other night class of teaching adults computing skills, and they said, oh yeah, you can use a computer, do you want to do this? And I said very clearly, look, I'm not a computer expert, but they said, no, you'll be fine. And I can remember really planning, doing loads and loads of work for the very first class, thinking, oh my god, what am I going to do? And I had these really complicated things and was really trying to, like make sure that I knew what was going on, and so that I'd be on top of everything. And I can remember just standing in front of everybody. Is it like a little village hall or something in Wymondham? And I can remember being there at the front of the class and going, right, okay, everyone, I've got all these things we're going to do today in the first class. If you just want to turn your computer on, and then was like, well, how do we do that? And then I suddenly thought, this is it. I found my audience. I'm fine. It's going to be okay. They don't know how to turn the computer on. They're not going to be asking anything too complicated. So, and it was just a wonderful, I think 8 weeks, and it was brilliant. I loved it. Such lovely memories.
Oh,
and now we have a computer literate town, and it's all thanks to you.
Entirely thanks to me. Exactly. You're welcome, Wymondham.
So, but that's not why we wanted to talk to you with Kett's books, because you are a proper author now.
I am. This was my first book, and I can remember dropping it in to Kett's books when the hardback was out. Yeah, and saying hello, having a chat.
That's right.
And then when the paperback came out, I came and said hello again and signed some books.
And you brought us this, didn't you?
Yeah, it's huge, isn't it?
Huge.
Yeah. So I have to say, I don't sit at home making those in my spare time. Those are done by the marketing people at Simon & Schuster, and they're very good. And I think they made about 30 and sent them off to a select few independent bookshops. And it's wonderful now. I walk in to these bookshops that had the cow, and they just say, it's the cow man.
Which in context of the book is not a compliment, is it?
Definitely not, no.
I mean, and you have a second book out now. That's why we're talking to you again.
Yes, absolutely. Here we go. That's why we're chatting today. So I've got my second book coming out, and it's a follow-up to the first book, All About Evie, yeah.
Yes, and it will be in hardback. That's what we call the proof, isn't it? Just sort of a fancy draft version. When does it come out?
It comes out July the 21st. There we go. I should know, shouldn't I? Thursday, July the 21st. I've only just discovered that books always come out on Thursdays.
Yes, they do. Yes.
It's something new to me, yeah.
Yes. I don't know why, but yes, they do. the second book is a continuation of the first, isn't it? Do you want to put us in context and then tell us a bit about the second book? So remind our viewers what happened in the first book, please.
Okay, so here we go. So here's the first book. The first book grew out of, I spent my teaching. I teach at the V&A Museum, and so I teach design history. And I noticed that my students saw decades. We talk about decades a lot in history, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And I just could tell that they thought that all these 10 years in a decade, you know, like, is exactly the same, this monolithic block where, you know, we all wake up on the 1st of January 1980 with shoulder pads and a perm, and it stays like that right until the last day of the decade. And of course, it's not like that. You know, decades change. They take a bit of time to discover themselves, to grow up, if you like. So I wanted to write a coming of age novel for a decade, and I chose the 60s because that's the one that everybody knows. Everybody feels like they've lived in the 60s and experienced the pop culture of the 60s, the music, the films, the fashion. And so I also wanted to write the coming of age of a person, Evie Epworth. She's 16 and a half, just at the start of adulthood. And I wanted to try and capture that energy that you have when you're 16 and you've got your entire life ahead of you, this infinite universe of potential. And I want to try and capture that, you know, like the energy and the confusion and the drama and all of those things in Evie. So the book charts basically, I suppose, Evie's coming of age and the 1960s coming of age in a small Yorkshire village in 1962. And if the second book, if you like, is it's 10 years later, and if the first book charted the coming of age of the 60s, the second one, set in 1972, is really kind of the death of the 60s, or the death of the idealism of the 60s. The 60s sort of dribbled on a few years into the 70s. It's like, when did the 70s start? And it's kind of late 72, 73, and when all that kind of, you know, the idealism and the energy of the 60s just sort of dribbled out. And I suppose as well, you know, after a decade as hugely important as the 60s, with so much happening and so much changing, what happens next? What could possibly happen next? And all those people who grew up in the 60s, they're just looking around going, okay, now what? And it sort of talks about that as well. Yeah.
It talks quite a lot about that, doesn't it? Because Evie acquires her own 16-year-old, doesn't she? And she worries that at the old age of 26, she might be past it because she's still in the 60s, remembering what was cool then and sort of conscious that things are moving on. So how did you capture all of that?
Because I can remember that feeling really clearly. Suddenly, because you always, up until being round about, you know, like your mid-20s or you're getting close to 30, you suddenly see this massive thing called 30 coming towards you that you've never really thought you'd ever hit before. Because it's like always, yeah, it's for old people, it's a long way away. And suddenly it's there, almost within touching distance, and which is terrifying as it is. And then even worse, you realize that you're not the bright young things anymore. There's another generation coming up behind you with their own ideas. How dare they? You know, and kind of, I can remember that feeling before of like never ever, I surpassed the age of ever being a child prodigy, and there's like all these new wonderful people coming up behind me who are brilliant and clever and doing wonderful creative things, and being sort of 26, 27, 28 and thinking, oh God, is that it? So she kind of has one of those moments. And it's also, I think back in the early 70s as well, people married quite young and you know, start having families, and Evie isn't married at the beginning of the book, and she's sort of thinking, oh God, hold on, what's sort of happening? When am I going to grow up? I suppose that's what she's thinking, yeah. And I can remember thinking that, still do quite often, actually, yeah.
Yes, well,
the voice for Evie, Matson, because I mean, that's something I loved about the first book, and Tracy and I were chatting about this just before you joined us, just this really kind of effervescent, kind of bubbly thing that if you've been a 16-year-old girl, and I'm guessing you haven't been a 16-year-old girl, you can relate to it very strongly. How did you grasp onto that?
I think I can remember.
And a 26-year-old girl as well.
Yeah, well, with the 16-year-old, I can remember really clearly being that age and finishing school and thinking, right, okay, what comes next? And just having all that energy and the confusion and you know, all the hopes and dreams and desires and everything racing around my head at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So I can remember that. And I don't think, I mean, when I was sort of 16, I didn't think it was massively different between sort of girls and boys. Maybe things are different now, but I had lots of mates who were girls, and we were all talking about more or less the same things back then in the 80s. And I wanted to try and capture that energy. I mean, it's wonderful that you talk about the effervescence, you know, the life in there, because that's something that I really wanted. And so I knew that probably the best way to do that was from the first person, writing in the first person. Because that does give you, like, you know, so much energy involved in writing the first person, I think. And I thought I was being really clever initially. It's the first novel I've ever written. I thought, look at me, I'm writing in the first person. This is great, I can do this. And it got till about chapter 3 or 4, then I suddenly realized, it's like when you're painting the floor and you paint yourself into a corner, because I can only write about something that Evie is there seeing. I was like, oh no, God, I didn't realize this before, because I was such a complete amateur novelist, never written anything before. So that's when I came up with the idea of the interludes, the kind of flashback sequences. And I think those enable me to give some context to various important characters in the book, but also they provide the emotional heft, I think, of the book, and also a little bit of almost a restful moment, because the Evie narrative is so going at 1,000,000 miles an hour and hopefully full of fun and brio, and those are just a little bit calmer and a bit more writerly, I suppose.
Their life experience, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah. So coming to the second book, I had a gap of maybe 3 or 4 months where I hadn't done any writing. This is before the first book came out, and I can remember thinking, right, I'm gonna have to sit down and, you know, try and start the second book at least, you know, before the first one comes out, so I've got something on page. And I was absolutely terrified, because I thought, oh no, what if like the voice has gone and like Eve is not talking to me, like a seance or something. And I was really nervous, and I did exactly the same with the second book as I did with the first book. Sort of thought about it, planned it a little bit, sat down and wrote the first few pages, and it was wonderful. It was like meeting an old friend again. The voice was just there, and it's exactly the same in the published book as it was when I sat down and wrote it. Oh, wow. And I can just smell when something's an Evie thing to say or not an Evie thing to say, and it just goes, yeah.
Do you want to read a few pages?
I can do, yeah. Here we go. Let's have a look. Here we go. Okay, so here we go. I'll just read the first few sentences. Okay. I am the wind. I skeet across tarmac and whoosh over dale. Birds skate along my amorphous limbs and the sun bakes down on my back. I'm a sirocco, hot as the desert sand. I fly. Yeah, that's quite enough hot air for today, Evie. That's Pamela, my boss, the producer. I'm in the Woman's Hour recording studio at Broadcasting House, and I'm sound checking for an extremely special recording. Princess Anne is coming to do an interview. Amazing. Pamela, grey hair, jodhpur bothering, cruciverbalist, pulled a few horsey strings to get the interview, and ever since, she's been busy arranging everything with the planning and precision of a moon landing. And who am I? I'm Evie. A silk scarf rocking, Bieber frocking, hollyhocking, cheesecloth smocking, spatchcocking, collared stocking, list up knocking, 26-and-a-half-year-old. I grew up on a small farm in Yorkshire, that's another story, but been living in London for the past 10 years, swinging my way through most of the 60s and hot panting my way into the 70s.
Oh, wow.
Excellent.
I love it. Can I just say, horsey strings is just... Pulling horsey strings. Is there no better way, surely, of talking about securing a royal interview?
I loved that. Yeah.
Wow. And clearly it's a very deliberate decision to have that same cadence and the same start as you have with Evie, the Evie 1.
Yeah, I really enjoy writing in the voice of Evie, because she's got such... one of the things that she loves is she's got a love of words. She's an only child like me, and she's a great reader like me, and she really just loves playing with words and sort of like jumping into words like a glorious swimming pool and having a good splash around in there as well. And it's something that I'm able to write and do all that through Evie, and I really enjoy that, and having lots of fun with words, and the cadence and the rhythm of the sentences. I mean, one of the things that I did in my first draft, when I sent it off to Chris, my lovely editor at Simon & Schuster, occasionally there'd be, in the sentence, there'd be kind of like a big X and a little X. And it's like, Matson, what's going on here? What are these X's? I said, oh, well, that's because I know I want a 2-syllable word in there with the stress on the first syllable, and because it was just the rhythm of the sentence. So I knew something, I wanted something there in the rhythm, but wasn't sure which kind of three-syllable word with the stress in the middle. I wasn't quite sure yet. So it's kind of like, I hear the sentences. I think sentences, they need to kind of sing. I think every word's important, and if a sentence doesn't sing, what's it doing in the book, really? I think I think it's kind of our job as writers to try and a sentence shouldn't just be some words shoved in between a couple of full stops. I think we have to try and, it's everyone's job to try and write as well as they can, and the musicality, I think, for me, is a big part of that. Yeah. Maybe because I like music so much, as you can tell from the books.
Yes. So speaking of music, there's quite a lot of it, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, again, Evie likes music, and I think music's a very good way to sort of chart the difference of generation. That movement from one generation to the next. It's when the music that you love and listen to all the time suddenly becomes a bit old-fashioned, and like this new music comes up, the new generation. You realize, oh wow, this is different. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's not. Yeah.
It was really useful as a reader to have that to help place what was going on. And even in Evie 1, when I'm telling customers about the book, I'll say it includes the first time she heard the Beatles. And so they kind of know what they're going to be getting. They're quite exciting and appealing. So I loved the how you marked the difference between the emerging 70s and the disappearing 60s with the character of Griffin.
I had a lot of fun writing Griffin. Griffin, for people who haven't read the book yet, Griffin is the kind of the baddie in the book, and she's very patronizing and sort of looks down on Evie. And I have to be very careful what I say. I've met quite a few Griffins, men and women, and they tend, being from the north, I'm from Yorkshire, and now living in London. I've met lots of Griffins who kind of think, because I don't live in NW3, a certain part of London, or I'm from the countryside. You kind of like, you read a book. Oh, well done. That's really good of you. God, yeah. What, you've been to an exhibition? Jolly good. Yeah, did you like it? And they are a bit patronizing like that. And Griffin is a bit patronizing like that. She's always telling Evie she should read something that's improving and serious. And don't read for fun, read because you kind of have to get better. And she is very much, like you said, she's very much part of the 60s and will not move on. And she doesn't want to acknowledge that there's any change at all, because I think probably she's very happy where she is, and so that's it. Yeah, she's not moving.
No, except she's not, is she? She's all about love, peace, karma, but actually she's really nasty. Yeah,
well, that's another. I sort of have worked with various people like that who like outwardly profess, peace and love and understanding, and actually they can be like the worst people to work with, because they can be like really passive aggressive, or kind of not even passive aggressive, but aggressive sometimes, and yet they're all like, ooh, yeah, touchy feely, but not really when you scratch the surface. So I wanted, it's that hypocrisy. In a way, it's a little bit, I mean, people talk now about this kind of display culture. And it's a way, we've got this display culture now where they're sort of like in the media quite a lot. And I think Griffin would definitely be the type of person who would be all over social media saying how fantastic she is and how she feels and empathizes with absolutely every single person in the world, apart from the person who she's just been really horrible to down the corridor. Yeah.
So before we ask you about the books that you're going to recommend, I just have to ask if you had to do any special, the extra work to make it okay to use Princess Anne's name, particularly in the scenario that you used.
No, I haven't done, and Simon & Schuster haven't either. So I'm not quite sure. my OBE is cancelled, I think. Yeah, my invitation to the Palace Garden Party.
Yeah, but you made us laugh, so it doesn't matter.
Well, in the first book, like lots of people say, oh, you've ruined Jerusalem for me. I can never hear Jerusalem ever again because of something that happened in the first chapter of the first book. And I think the second one might be, I'll never be able to use my Haunted Pottery mugs again, you know, in the same way,
yeah. So for people who have read The Miseducation of Evie Epworth, to use its full title, and are waiting for the 21st of July so they can rush out and get a copy of All About Evie of their very own in their hands, what would you recommend that they read now?
A couple of books, really. I'm rereading for probably about the 5th or 6th time To the Lighthouse. I love To the Lighthouse. It's just wonderful. I love how I'm sort of thinking about my third book, and my third book is going to be non-Evie, and it's going to be in the third person writing. And I love how Virginia Woolf handles the third person, because it's very, very close third person. You're right there in somebody's head experiencing their thoughts, and she does that brilliantly as the third person moves from character to character. And it's a very poetic book, and there's a beautiful section in the middle where time passes and sort of 10 years passes, and she does it absolutely just stunningly. It's very poetic, and I tried to kind of condense that sort of like very small chapter into one very long sentence in All About Evie, where I try and say everything that's happened in the previous 10 years. So I was kind of inspired by To the Lighthouse very, very loosely. But it's a beautiful book. And again, we were talking about good writing and prose earlier on. And for me, Virginia Woolf is just one of the best writers stylistically in the language. I could just listen to her sentences forever. They're beautiful. In the same way that I love Katherine Mansfield, you know, Virginia Woolf and Katherine Mansfield are right up there for me as beautiful writers. So that's one. And then can I do another one as well?
Do several.
I've got another one. I've got When God Was a Rabbit, which I haven't read yet, but I can remember when I sent Evie off to agents and I sort of met various agents, a couple of the agents said, because what agents generally tend to do is say, oh, your book is like this book, and this book. And agents were saying, oh, it's a bit sort of like Alan Bennett, or there's a bit sort of Sue Townsend. Somebody said it's a bit like early Kate Atkinson and Joanna Cannon. I'd read all of those people and thought, oh, wow, great, I know these. And somebody said, it's like this book, and I'd never heard of this book. So I remember writing it down, and I lost my Post-it note where it was. Anyway, a few months ago, or a few weeks ago, actually, I read A Year of Marvelous Ways by Sarah Winman, and was blown away by it because, again, I mean, she is another fantastic, beautiful, poetic writer. And this book, A Year of Marvelous Ways, is stunning, really. Yeah, it revolves around these two characters and how they brought together in life. And it's the book, the writing, it's very sort of a writer's writer. It's very writerly, I suppose, and the narrator is really there making you aware of her presence, and there's an absolute joy of words in the book, and it just made me want to read more by Sarah Winman. I haven't read Still Life. I know that Still Life's like the massive one, isn't it? So I'm waiting to read Still Life, but this is the one that I want to read next. Just because, like I say, a couple of agents said it reminded them of my first book in terms of, I don't know, the feeling or something. So that'd be interesting to read.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation.
You want some more?
Yeah, sure.
Right, okay. Well, actually, there's one coming up. People won't be able to buy it yet because it's coming out on the same day as mine, and it's by somebody called Frances Quinn.
Oh, I love Frances Quinn.
The Smallest Man was her book. It's a historical novel set in the English Civil War. And I just loved it. And the English Civil War is something I didn't know that much about. So it was wonderful to read this historical novel where I was learning so much. But she wears her research, you know, lightly. You don't feel like you're sort of like drudging through a really dry history book, because it's, again, really beautifully written, and funny and lively and witty, and the characters are wonderful. And so her second book is called That Bonesetter Woman. And so it's coming off the back of That Smallest Man, The Smallest Man, I had really high expectations, and it surpassed the expectations. It's just stunning. It's set in the 18th century, it's based on a real life story of a woman who was a bonesetter. So kind of like a bonesetter was somebody who, if you couldn't afford a doctor, often you'd go off and have a boneset if you had any sort of limb problems or broken something. And it's fantastic because, again, it just brought the 18th century to life. You know, I've studied the 18th century a lot, and I think I probably learned more from Fran's book than I did from lots of the dry old history books that I've read. And it's a cracking story. So
I can't wait.
Yeah.
She's on our list of people that we want to talk to on here. So yeah,
she's really good fun as well.
I'm glad that you've said the new book is good, because I didn't want to be disappointed, because I also loved The Smallest Man.
I think it's better than The Smallest Man, which is high praise indeed, because I absolutely love The Smallest Man.
Yeah. Well, that's been really, really interesting and entertaining talking to you. Thank you for joining us again, and we can't wait to see your non-Evie book written in the third person coming out in the next couple of years.
I'm not quite sure. I don't know. Simon & Schuster have got an absolutely terrifying Matson Taylor spreadsheet with everything in. And it's like, as somebody who has tried to avoid spreadsheets all their life, the thought of having my own spreadsheet, it's like the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. And also as well, like, I don't know, being an only child, I hate being told what to do. So having somebody else organize my entire life until like 2030 or something I can't bear it, to be honest. So it's all there, plotted out, like Operation Desert Storm in the Simon & Schuster office. So I'm not sure when it's coming out. I need to write it first. Yeah, it's set in Rome, so I need to go and do some research trips to Rome. Absolutely,
I think you definitely need to do that. Yes, right. Okay, well, thank you again for joining us. It's always good to talk to you, and come by if you find yourself in Norfolk.
I definitely will. I'll absolutely be there July or early August. Yeah, I'll come and say hello.
Right. Okay, super. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Matson. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.